Thank you, Bruce. Now I know never to follow a president and managing director also in a speech. But thank you to Bruce. Thank you to Mayor Coleman for that very, very inspiring speech. We are so grateful for what you did to get us back to work. And it's an incredible feeling. One of the most amazing feelings I've ever had in my life was when we walked onto stage at the opening of this season to a full house and a standing ovation and taking that group bow. It was truly inspiring, and it really made me feel like I completely made the right choice to stay here. But I'm going to go into more detail about that. Thank you also to all of you here today who support this great chamber orchestra, the board of directors, the governing members, the friends of the SPCO, my fellow staff and musicians, and our devoted and loyal audience. I have to echo what Bruce said about what every guest artist says when they come here. This is the most amazing audience in the world, hands down. They all remark on how attentive, how curious, how open they are to the experience, and we feel it on stage. It's an incredible thing. It is an honor to stand here today to give this keynote address, just as it is an honor to serve the SPCO in two very different, but I think completely compatible capacities, as musician and now as administrator. This past Saturday marked the 6-month anniversary of the return to music making for the SPCO after the traumatic events of last year. It's an opportune time for us to reflect on what has transpired since then and to appreciate how far we have been able to come in such a short time. As Bruce and John and the mayor have both made abundantly clear, we have a long way to go to realize the artistic aspirations of the SPCO. In reality, we must never stop striving to grow, to evolve, to adapt, to improve, to invest, and to reinvest. To stop doing any of those things translates into rapid decline and certain death for any artistic endeavor. Even so, I think this is a good opportunity to replay some of the recent events and to retell a story that I've been telling a lot over the last 6 months. Last May, I was getting ready to move to New York to join the New York Philharmonic, and this is the story of why I stayed. I am on record as saying that the choice of staying or leaving is very personal, and that I can only speak for myself. And of course, that is true, but I think the story of why I chose to stay speaks on a much broader level as to what the SPCO is about and where we are going as an organization. The truth is that my heart was never into the idea of joining the New York Philharmonic. I auditioned for the New York Phil in February rather reluctantly, and I think it's safe to say that I never would have auditioned at all had it not been for the lockout. I was serving on the negotiating committee for the musicians at the time, and I was devoting much more time and energy to committee work than I was to preparing for the audition. I distinctly remember driving home from one of the few negotiating sessions in which both sides sat down and actually talked across the table. And as I was driving, I had this very strong feeling in my gut that I was meant to stay in Saint Paul, that somehow I could help promote better dialogue and find points of common interest. I had hoped that day that the SPCO would find its way soon, but those hopes would be dashed many times in the next few weeks and months. In the meantime, I auditioned for New York, won the audition, and began to make plans to leave. I started to rationalize the decision to leave. It wasn't that hard, really. There was the money issue, and the fact that my wife, Pitneri Shin, a cellist in the Minnesota Orchestra, and I were both locked out, and we have 2 young kids. I told myself I would be happy in a big orchestra, with little to no voice in the artistic direction of the organization. It really was my wife who deserves the credit for waking me up. When Patrick Castillo announced his resignation as Senior Director of Artistic Planning at the end of April, Pitneri said, "You should ask for that job. You can do that and keep playing as principal second, and that's what you want to be doing." I said, "That's crazy, it could never happen, and you really need to call the movers." Actually, it was hiring the movers which caused Pitneri to have the panic attack that precipitated my conversation with Bruce. Bruce's return as president and managing director had just been announced, and he wanted to meet and see if I could be enticed to stay with more opportunities to lead the orchestra or play concertos. Instead, I basically raised my hand and said, "I'm really interested in Patrick's job." And that started a series of conversations and extensive interviews, lots of jumping through hoops, which I feel like I'm still doing, which led to this appointment, and to me telling the New York Phil the day before I was about to start that I was going to stay in St. Paul. So why did I raise my hand? Am I just a glutton for punishment? I think that goes without saying. I have to admit, doing both jobs is harder than I thought it would be. It is the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, and the stress is extreme. That said, I love it, and I feel lucky every day to have this opportunity. It is completely new ground, not just for the SPCO, but for the American orchestra world at large. It changes the dynamic in the organization, no pun intended, on a daily basis, both in the offices and here in the music room. I bring my perspective as a playing member of the orchestra to all my work in the office, and vice versa. Before I started this job in July, I had a vague understanding that managing an orchestra is really hard work. But until you walk the walk, the full understanding is just not there. I remember telling Jean Parrish, our general manager, in one of my interviews for the administrative job, that I didn't want to just come up with an idea and pass it off to someone else to execute. I wanted to be there every step of the way. What I see now is how much an idea morphs and changes, and sometimes, unfortunately, gets scaled back or even dies because of many layers of factors. Of course, you need the passion to persevere through those challenges, and what better way to foster that passion than to keep the connection as alive and as real as possible between the execution on stage and the planning behind the scenes. What keeps me going is the absolute belief that this is the right thing, not just for me, but for the SPCO. A big part of what made it possible for me to have this dual role is the collaborative structure that the SPCO already had in place, which Bruce mentioned earlier. In 2003, the SPCO took giant steps in the direction of giving musicians a voice in artistic decision-making, most significantly through the formation of the AVC, the Artistic Vision Committee, a committee comprised of 3 musicians and 2 members of management that is tasked with setting the overall artistic direction of the organization. Over the past 10 years, the degree to which the AVC has functioned in a truly collaborative way has varied widely. I'm happy to report that the AVC functions beautifully now, just as it has been designed to do in the CBA. I'm one of 2 management representatives on the committee now, along with Bruce, which means, of course, that there are 4 orchestra members. Technically, in the absence of consensus, a supermajority of 4 can take control of the committee. Of course, that is not how we function, and we have never taken a vote on anything, and I doubt that we ever will. Nevertheless, it is undisputable that the board and management have taken a leap of faith in appointing a playing member of the orchestra to this artistic planning position. We desperately need these kinds of leaps of faith. We are not going to get to where we need to go by taking baby steps. The leaps of faith, the trust that we're developing on the AVC, these things are really paying off. How do we know we're on the right path? When top artist managers are contacting us and suggesting possible artistic partners. When the former cellist of the Guarneri Quartet and a teacher at the Curtis Institute of Music comes as guest principal cello and tells us that he's going to spread the word like mad about how great it is at the SPCO. We are faced with tremendous opportunity, but we have to know where we are going. It's something that I think about every day, almost every waking hour, to my family's chagrin. We are about to hire 9 new members over the next few years, nearly a third of the orchestra, and it will undoubtedly be transformational. But in what way? If you put your finger on the pulse of what's happening amongst the younger generation of musicians, the ones who are just graduating from the conservatories and universities and finding their way in the music world, it's all about entrepreneurship, taking initiative, creating something new, taking ownership of it, and assuming all the risks and all the rewards. Many of the leading conservatories now have entrepreneurial musicianship departments in place of career development services. Whether it's a string quartet, a new music ensemble, or a small orchestra, entrepreneurial musicians seem to be taking the world by storm in groups like Eighth Blackbird, ICE, which stands for International Contemporary Ensemble, or the Knights, the chamber orchestra in New York. All of those groups are musician-led, with musicians functioning as the engine and as the drivers. They're dreaming up the projects, financing them, marketing them, selling them, and performing them. The energy and an idealism that these musicians bring to their work is truly inspiring, and the music world has taken notice. At the Mostly Mozart Festival at Lincoln Center, it was striking how much more attention the critics paid this past summer to the new music concerts that ICE played in a 120-seat theater than they did to the traditional orchestra concerts of the Mostly Mozart Festival Orchestra in the 2,000-seat Avery Fisher Hall. The AVC and a group of staff and board members had the privilege of spending some time on a retreat with the founder of ICE, the flutist Claire Chase. Claire is the winner of a 2012 MacArthur Genius Award and can pretty accurately be described as a poster child for musical entrepreneurship. We were all inspired by her dynamism and charisma, and I think we all had the same feeling. Let's just take her home with us. But how do we reconcile a young startup like ICE with a 54-year-old institution like the SPCO? Do we have the kind of environment here at the SPCO to support that kind of entrepreneurship? To answer that, we need to be really clear about what we mean by entrepreneurial. I came across a definition of entrepreneurship by the Harvard Business School professor, Howard Stevenson, that really captures its essence. Entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. This is in a nutshell what Claire Chase told us at that retreat. She said, forget about how large your endowment is or what the financial constraints are. Think big, think about the art, have vision, and take risks. And when you succeed, just move on to something else, the next project. It was a completely radical idea. Another key characteristic of the entrepreneur, the business guru John Bergstone has described, is the way one approaches decision-making. Every time you want to make any important decision, there are two possible courses of action. You can look at the array of choices that present themselves, pick the best available option, and try to make it fit. Or you can do what the true entrepreneur does, figure out the best conceivable option, and then make it available. When I read that, it gave me a new perspective on my decision to stay and what it meant for the SPCO. I had never thought of raising my hand and asking for a job that I had never done before as an act of entrepreneurship, but that's what it really was. It was about making the best option available instead of trying to fit into a prescribed role. It was an entrepreneurial act that has been absolutely embraced by this organization in the most heartening way that I could have imagined, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. Entrepreneurship at the SPCO is about raising your hand and demonstrating your passion for an idea that you're burning to do, and then persevering through all the obstacles that will inevitably stand in your way. It is our job as an organization to support that kind of entrepreneurship for all of our current and our future musicians, for the staff and for the board. We've already made some great strides in this direction. Recently, the AVC wrote the position description for 2 violin openings. And for the first time in the SPCO's history, and probably in the history of American orchestras, we were intentional and explicit about what we are looking for. We wrote, among other things, the successful candidate will be expected to take part in this SPCO's community engagement programs, to excel in working in a collaborative environment with orchestra, staff, and board, and to be thoroughly invested in the artistic evolution of the SPCO. Under preferred experience, we even included entrepreneurial experience in ensemble formation and project development. This is not just about our future musicians, though. In a survey of our current musicians, there was overwhelming sentiment for broadening and deepening our community engagement activities. And as a direct result, we will be doing chamber music performances in nursing homes and hospices in the spring. We are creating room in the schedule for SPCO musicians to curate chamber music weeks in the 2014-2015 season, with the ability to not only define what we play, but where we play it and with whom we play it. We are doing this because it is not enough to just collaborate. We are moving beyond a culture of collaboration to one of shared ownership and entrepreneurship. I've talked a lot about the musicians today, but it is not just about the orchestra. We can't do it alone. We need the staff and the board and the governing members and the friends and the Club 2030 and of course our amazing audience as our partners in this journey. All of us in this room are invested in the evolution of this artistic enterprise, and it's a beautiful thing. That is why I stayed at the SPCO. Thank you.